After a year and a half of waiting, the Switch finally offered a way to play classic Nintendo games in September of 2018, but much to everybody's chagrin, all we got were 30-year-old titles from the NES. And seeing as how the friggin' Wii offered games from the Super Nintendo and 64 on the first day, it wasn't long before riots formed and demanded that the above-average-sized den release the same libraries on the Switch as well. As I'm sure most of you remember, the situation got out of control pretty damn quick, so to calm the riots down, Nintendo released 2 to 3 NES games per month rather than just give the people what they wanted. This was a good idea in theory, but most of the titles being added were obscure and mediocre in the modern day. So naturally, the angry mob only got that much more stronger and furious. Thankfully though, in September of 2019, Nintendo's top programmers finally found a way to accomplish the impossible task of putting Super Nintendo games onto the Switch's online service. And wouldn't you know it, this was enough to dispel most of the outrage aside from a few people who are still angry about the lack of 64 and GameCube games. However, given that the internet is, well, the internet, it wasn't too long before riots started meeting back up because Nintendo revealed that they wouldn't be adding new Super Nintendo titles every month like they did with the NES. But if you ask my respectably large rump, I don't see that as a reason for angry mobs to start meeting back up. Why is that, you ask? Well, turn your volume up to full blast to where you can't even understand what's going on, pour yourself a little bit of the bubbly, press the subscribe button if you haven't already, and allow me, the world's 3 billionth last hope Cameron, to tell you why we don't need Super Nintendo games added to the Switch every month. Alright, so I know there's still a lot of really good Super Nintendo games that are missing from the online service, but if having the launch lineup blowing the NESs out of the water means not having games sprinkled out as often for the next year, then I'm all for it. Personally, I'd rather they just put everything they're ever going to put up all at once, but I do understand the method of sprinkling games out. This helps the higher profile games make a bigger impact once they finally do arrive, and it also helps the lesser known titles have a stronger impact in general. Sure, Earthbound would have been nice, but if it's one of 2 or 3 titles that get added later on, then it's not going to be overshadowed and way more people are likely to actually check it out. So even though I still would have rather all the games just be added right away, that does mean I'm happy that Earthbound wasn't included in the launch lineup. I mean, now that Shigesato Toy's finished with the series, it's not really going to matter if it gets more popular anyway, but it'll still be nice to know that some more people might be checking it out thanks to having a more focused spotlight, as opposed to just being overshadowed by games like Super Metroid or Super Mario World. But going back to the first batch of Super Nintendo games, I think the lineup we got's pretty much the perfect way to kick things off, because the most popular first-party titles are all here, games being absent leaves us something to look forward to later, and plus, it'll be good to know that some wild cards being tossed into the mix might get more of a spotlight. I mean, I consider myself to be somewhat of a connoisseur of the Super Nintendo, but even I didn't know that much about Brawl Brothers. And based off of what I played so far, I've gotta say, the game's actually pretty cool. It's not as good as Final Fight or anything like that, but given that the Final Fight series is being sold in a compilation on the eShop, this is probably the best beat-em-up we could have gotten. And that brings me to the main reason why I think it's impossible to add quality Super Nintendo games every month. To be blunt, there really aren't that many Super Nintendo games left to be sprinkled out for an entire year. I mean, there are, but Nintendo can't just add whatever they want outside of their first-party titles, and most of those are already up as it is. I don't know how much, but the below-oversized end definitely needs to pay third parties for rights to add their games to the service. And on a side note, I'd really love to know more details about how long they have the rights to these titles for. Mainly because it just gives us a better idea of how long Nintendo plans to support the Switch, but now I'm just getting off topic. Still though, it's an interesting question that I haven't heard anybody ask. But anyway, the fact is that Nintendo's charging $20 a year for their online service. So whether they're paying third parties a flat fee or giving them a percentage of the sales, Nintendo can't be making that much money off their games. Which obviously means that third parties would be making considerably less. Don't get me wrong, I know there's assloads of people subscribed to the service, but I'd be shocked if there were more than like 3 or 4 people specifically paying for the NES and Super Nintendo games. Most people are just paying to play their Switch games online, so to me, the retro games are really just freebies meant to soften the blow. So to that extent, I feel like we can't really complain about essentially getting these games for free, but I do wish we at least had the option to permanently buy them. I mean, the Switch isn't going to be around forever, so once it stops receiving online support, we could kiss all these classic games goodbye, seeing as how you have to connect to the internet every 7 days just to play them. I'd guess Nintendo's not selling classic games through the Virtual Console anymore, because they know a lot of people won't repurchase them in the next generation if they can't transfer all their old games up. They probably think if they did let us do that, then people would buy a bunch of games now and then they'd never make money off them again. However, with the subscription model though, people are forced to pay less money for more games in the short term. But since nobody's going to be able to keep these games, they're going to have to keep paying for the service forever just to play them. Again, I think Nintendo's losing money on their NES and SNES library since most people are only buying the service to play the modern games online. But the bottom line is that since we can't make games individually, less money's being made off each title. And if third parties are going to make less money, then they're not going to have as much of an incentive to offer their games, which is probably why we're seeing so many compilations being made. And if I'm being honest, I think that's actually better than temporarily owning them with the online service anyway. So without being able to add games from franchises like Mega Man, Mega Man X, Castlevania, Castlevania, Final Fight, Bebe's Kids, Street Fighter, Contra, and probably something else that I'm missing. I don't see how Nintendo could realistically add 2 to 3 games every month without people getting angry. Besides, it's not like the NES was adding good games every month anyway, most of them were just random. So Nintendo's just gonna get buried for adding games that aren't home runs, and it's hard to blame them for only adding games that people will actually be happy with, especially if they're essentially just giving them away for free. If I were in charge of Nintendo, and Lord knows that I should be, I'd just add all the past consoles as soon as possible. That way Nintendo could add 2 to 3 retro games every month, even if it wouldn't always be from the same console. I mean, like I said, the Switch isn't gonna be around forever, so it'll be pretty weird if they're still adding consoles when it's on life support. It kinda feels like Nintendo knows they're giving NES and Super Nintendo games away for free as kinda like a free sample, then once more consoles become available to split off into tiers. And I think that's pretty freaking ridiculous if that ends up being the case. In fact, I already made a video about how Nintendo Switch Online tiers would be a terrible idea on my personal channel if you want to hear more on that, wink wink. Who knows though, maybe the point of the Netflix-style service is just to sell these controllers. But unless higher tiers meant things like dedicated servers, then I don't think too many people are gonna pay that much more just to temporarily rent games when the save files are just gonna disappear on the next console. As far as the Super Nintendo library and the Switch goes though, it is possible that I'm forgetting some key games. But outside of the third-party compilations that are already being sold on the eShop, the only other ones I could think of were either licensed or owned by Square. And I'm pretty sure we all know how stingy they could be with their retro titles. So unless the Switch's online service gets a price bump to like $27,000 a year or something, I'm really not expecting too many of their RPGs popping up anytime soon. I'm not saying it's not gonna happen, I just think it's probably not as easy for Nintendo to do as most people think. I know Breath of Fire is the Squaresoft logo on the box, but that game was actually made by Capcom. Squaresoft only published that game in North America because that was the only way RPGs in the States even had a chance at succeeding back then. And even then, it still wasn't a guarantee. Then there's the Donkey Kong Country titles, which were originally created by Rare, which is a company that's now owned by Microsoft. It was probably pretty easy to split the sales of these on the Virtual Console, but I'd imagine it's a bit more complicated with the subscription service. Don't get me wrong, I'm sure we're gonna see these games at some point. I mean, it's not like Microsoft owns them or anything like that. I'm just saying there's probably a few things that need to be ironed out first, but to be honest, I don't really know how the rights work in this situation. All I know is that if there aren't any issues that need to be ironed out, then Nintendo's out of their goddamn minds, not only for leaving Donkey Kong Country out of the first wave, but also for leaving Donkey Kong Countries 2 and 3 off the SNES Classic. It'd be absolutely incredible if Nintendo released a few games that never left Japan like Fire Emblem, but for some reason they like to pretend that it's even remotely hard for them to translate old games into English, even though individual human beings have kind of been doing it for decades without any compensation. At any rate though, seeing as how most of the key Super Nintendo games are either probably off limits or too much trouble to add, I really don't see why people are upset we aren't getting new games every month. There's definitely a few first-party heavy hitters missing at the time of this recording, but not enough to sprinkle out 2 to 3 times a month for a year. So if you ask me, I kind of think that the people who are mad aren't mad because they can't play all these Super Nintendo games, they're just mad because they can't have them. I think it's awesome we can play Super Nintendo games on the Switch now, and I'm definitely going to be happy when more games are added for sure. But much like most of you, my priorities are probably going to be focused more on the modern games that are hard enough to keep up with as it is. I do plan on finishing Super Metroid all the way through for the first time, and whenever I feel like playing a game for like 15 minutes or something, I'm probably going to play Yoshi's Island even though I 100%ed it before. But seeing as how I already had my SNES Classic hacked, emulators are free, and I'm mainly paying to play Switch games online, I really can't find a reason to be mad about not getting new Super Nintendo games every month. There's not that much in it for third parties if the entire service only costs $20 a year. Nobody's specifically paying for Super Nintendo games anyway. Many of the best games are already available, and most importantly of all, there will be new games added, it just won't be every month like before. Although, I do kinda wish we had the Virtual Console as an option still. But anyway, what do you think about the Switch not adding Super Nintendo games every month? Would you rather have more options even if they're not as good? Or should Nintendo make sure that every good third-party game ever made gets added at all costs? Either way, let me know what you think in the comments below, and I'll try my goddamnedest to respond to everybody. But let me tell you about 2 people who should be added to the Switch's online service as soon as possible are today's patrons of the day, Curry Chicken Man and Bo White. If you want to be badasses like these two, then consider supporting FU Game Crew on Patreon for loot boxes in the mail and other wacky rewards. And if you want to make a cameo, then send pictures or videos of you rocking any FU Game Crew merch like these legendary human beings you see before you. As always, like and share this video anywhere on the internet to help this channel grow. And if you want to prove that you're not down with registered sex offenders, then go ahead and press the subscribe button if you haven't already. My name's Cameron, all one word, and I'll be back with more videos soon.
So I want to say thank you to your loyalty, thank you for your support.